We once heard the story of a kid named Grant who had autism. When Grant showed up for the first day of school, he was carrying a bucket filled with his stuff. He held on to it because everything in the bucket was very important to him. As Grant went through the day, he would walk from place to place, finding other stuff to add to his bucket because it was his bucket, and he wanted to put things in it that were important to him. As the days went on, it got to the point where Grant needed a bigger bucket because he wanted to make sure he had everything with him wherever he went. And everywhere he went, Grant held on to his bucket. However, the problem was obvious. Grant couldn't participate in the normal activities of the classroom because he was holding onto his bucket. He couldn't have relationships with kids like he needed to because he was holding on to his bucket. The teachers began to devise a plan because they realized in order to get Grant to participate in the class, they were going to have to figure out how to get him to let go of his bucket. So here's what they did. A teacher would wait for Grant to show up at the door, and she would say, "Hey Grant, let me hold your bucket while someone gives you a hug." Or, "Here Grant, let me hold your bucket while you play with this toy." Gradually over time, Grant began to let go of his bucket more and more until the day came when he showed up without his bucket at all. That was the turning point in Grant's life, when he let go of the bucket. The teacher said his personality changed and he began to interact with other students in a way he never had before. The principle is simple. Until Grant was able to let go of the thing he had been holding on to, he wasn't able to move to the next level in his life. In some ways, we are more like Grant than we might think. In our own way, we each carry around our own personal bucket. And we walk around holding on to all this stuff that we feel like we can't get rid of. Somewhere along the way, we end up having all these things that we think are important to us. We just don't gather things either. We hold on to these thoughts and feelings, especially in the areas of pain, hurt, or disappointment. We begin to collect all these things that we are holding on to emotionally, and we don't want to let them go. Every time we get hurt, we add to our bucket. And sometimes when someone hurts us, we actually add a new bucket that represents who they are, and we start storing up our grievances against them. If this continues to happen, we can find ourselves missing out on what's good for us because we can't let go of our hurt and pain. That's why we're taking the next 4 weeks to talk about forgiveness. We define forgiveness as deciding that someone who has wronged you doesn't have to pay. In other words, forgiveness is learning how to let go of the buckets and walk away. Forgiveness happens when we just decide we're going to stop adding to the list of hurt and pain we carry with us. We simply decide we're going to quit gathering ammunition. And we decide we're going to take the things that we've been holding on to and we're simply going to walk away. It's like our memory verse says in Colossians 3:13. Put up with one another. Forgive one another if you are holding something against someone. Forgive just as the Lord forgave you. The most compelling reason that we can let go of our buckets, the most compelling reason for why we can forgive other people is because we have been forgiven. That's why we're starting in Luke, where Jesus tells us a story of ultimate grace and forgiveness. The religious leaders aren't thrilled that Jesus is hanging out with riffraff sinners, so Jesus responds with 2 familiar stories. In the first story, the shepherds risk the entire flock in order to find and rescue the one sheep who has run off. We'll focus on God's love for us that went to great lengths to rescue us from our sin. Through this story of the lost sheep, we pray that kids will remember that God forgives us. In week 2, we move to the story of the lost son. Now, this kid thinks he's got it all together. He demands half of his dad's money and takes off to spend it on himself. It's only when the money's gone that he realizes he's made a huge mistake and needs forgiveness. He's got just one hope, that his dad will let him come home and be a servant. Realizing one's need for forgiveness is a huge step for anyone. We hope kids will realize that everyone needs forgiveness, even them. For the next week, we move on to the rest of the lost son story. Although the son returns ready to work off the money he took from his father, the father welcomes his lost son home and even throws a giant party. But not everyone's too happy about this. The kid's older brother has obeyed dad all his life without a single party to show for it. He's sulking in the backyard until dad shows up. And if big brother isn't willing to let this whole thing go, well, he's gonna miss out big time. And so can we if we don't forgive others. That's why we want kids to remember that when they don't forgive, they can miss out. We wrap up our month on forgiveness hearing more about the time when Jesus tells the story of a servant who likes to live it up, even though he's weighed down by millions of dollars in debt. This servant gets a big break when the king forgives his debt. You think he's got it made until he finds a man who owes him just a few bucks. You think he'd pay it forward and cancel the debt, but that's not what happened. He gets caught when he didn't forgive others like the king forgave him. Kids will learn that since God forgave them, they should forgive others. This month, think about the kind of invisible buckets the kids in your ministry are showing up with every week. These 4 stories that we're going to cover, we hope will help kids let go of what they might be holding against others.